So, Christiana, have you been reading the papers lately?
Oh, yeah. I love the funny pages.
Well, didn't you read about that hit that happened yesterday? You know, the police investigation.
Oh, sure I did. Ignance hit Crazy Cat in the head with a brick, and Officer Bullpup arrested him.
Nah, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that little guy on the front page.
Oh, yeah. Billibob Baddins, ace detective. Say, how come they call him an ace detective?
Probably because he's too short to drive, so he's got to take an ace wherever he goes.
So why is he on the front page of the paper? Not very private for a private detective.
Well, it's like this. Billy was called to the murder scene of gangster Benny Roletto.
A gangster? Why did he get killed? Did he serve Capone a bad meatball or something?
Nah, the only thing Roletto was cooking were the books. So, Billy gets his name and his picture on the front pages, attracts himself a lot of unwanted attention. In fact, he was contacted by the one and only Ava Rothschild. She wanted to hire him away from his current client, Julia Lessinger.
Those high society types are so glamorous.
Maybe so, but some not-so-glamorous types saw that picture, too. Billy might be in over his head.
That doesn't sound too hard. He's only 4 feet tall.
What I mean is that there might be some people who want Billy to stop asking questions about the Mayo and their singing sword.
Oh, yeah, that could be bad. You could end up getting some big muscle types shoving you into a car, asking you to dinner.
You just have to hope it's not Italian food on the waterfront. Well, you know what that means. You folks now know the story so far. Say goodnight, Christiana.
Good night, Christiana.
Chapter 8. My Dinner with Alphonse. Nobody said anything, the tension in the car growing so thick that a two-handed broadsword would have a problem getting through it. Not that I expected stimulating conversation or anything like that. If they wanted me to know where we were going, they would have told me already. And judging by the looks of these ogres, stimulating conversation probably consisted of extremely short, single-syllable words. I could see the hood ornament through the windshield, and I focused all my attention on it. This was not the time to take in the sights. Right now, I just needed to keep a cool head and hope I'd not pissed anyone off too high in the organization. Thanks to Chief O'Malley, I was now an instant celebrity whom everyone wanted to meet. The press kept calling me to find out why a little tyke like me was the best friend of Chicago's finest. A Rothschild wanted to outbid a Lessinger to have me, Snoop to the snobs, dig up quality dirt on her rival. And now, flanked by two palookas, someone in the business wanted words with me on one of their fallen foot soldiers. If I lived to see the dawn, I planned to mark this day in my calendar as the day to close up the office and stay in bed. Our destination established itself as an upper-tier hotel from the moment we rolled to a stop. A doorman, sporting a polite grin, tipped his hat to each of the ogres as we followed the red carpet to the doorway. Even for this dwarf, his obligatory expression and gesture were extended. I guess I was expected to remember that, so I wouldn't stiff him on a tip when I left. Provided I left of my own accord. As we entered the lobby, dark wood fixtures providing the only warmth in this cavernous expanse of marble and brass, the receptionists and bellhops didn't raise an eyebrow or give a second glance to my personal Neanderthal escorts. They did, however, nearly inflict severe whiplash on themselves when they caught a glance at the dwarf in their midst. Ditto for the guest milling about in the lounge or waiting at the reception desk. On noticing my companions, bystanders quickly retreated into their own personal solitudes, but not before I picked up on their shared thought. Better him than me. Now we were going up a red velvet staircase decked out with polished fixtures and black and white marble panels that shone as smooth as glass. I started to hope and pray that somewhere between telling Miranda I was going home and reaching the sidewalk outside my building, I had taken an arrow in the chest, and I was actually wandering through the sacred hall of Furrow Philanstub, the keeper and supreme guardian of the everlasting fields of Eunice. Here I would stand judgment for my lives in Acryonis and in America, held accountable for my deeds. Did I fulfill my duty to His Holiness, the Emperor? Did I serve as a good example to my people, never surrendering the pride of the Dwarven Empire? Would the great guardian grant me lands of my own in the everlasting fields, or turn me out of door, his judgment unquestioned and final? My prayer was answered with, "Billy, damn it, you aren't dead. Now focus," when I saw the kid in the elevator. He had it all: freckles, buck teeth, and a frame so skinny that a quick look at him would break a bone. He didn't bother to look at any of us as we got in, and didn't say anything as he closed the door. He was no different from the doorman in the way he moved like clockwork, preferring to remain oblivious to the outcome of his actions. While I knew this elevator didn't deliver me before the great guardian, it was clear I was about to face a judgment of some kind. Several floors later, the cage shut behind us with a loud clang that reverberated through the corridor as we walked down a carpeted hallway that closely resembled the halls of Hernheim, our footsteps resounding as soft, dull thuds. I fixed my gaze on the distant door at the end of the corridor, figuring that was where we were headed. Instead, we stopped before a pair of double doors halfway down. One of the ogres turned to face the hallway, looking left and right with a casual pat against his jacket's left breast lapel, probably making sure his boom dagger was where he last left it, in case anyone stopped by for unscheduled room service. The other ogre opened the right side door and looked down at me. Guess it was my turn to take the lead. First, I saw a desk, pristine and well organized, second only to Miranda's. No one was sitting behind it, so I surmised this meeting was not going to be recorded in a ledger somewhere. Continuing forward into the next room, I heard the footsteps behind me cease. I removed my hat as the light behind me dimmed, followed by a soft click. The only sounds I heard now were the light scraping of silverware against a plate, coming from somewhere in front of me. He sat by himself at a rounded table large enough for 8. There were a pair of guards stationed at the door behind me, a pair of guards several paces from the table, and one guard occasionally peering out from the drawn blind to catch a glimpse of the street. I couldn't help smiling at the sight of the man enjoying his dinner in the midst of a small army. From his size, you wouldn't think he needed guards. Even seated at the table, it was pretty apparent that he could take care of anyone wanting to start trouble. It was also apparent that if you did start something with him, he'd be the one to finish it. This was a big man who obviously enjoyed his Italian food, his Italian wine, and his Italian arias, which were softly playing on a nearby phonograph. I'm not a huge fan of the fat chicks strapping themselves into costumes 2 sizes too small, donning a ridiculous helm, and then belting out an hour-long goodbye after being supposedly poisoned. My advice to those operatic villains: use faster-acting poison. This particular aria, though, was different. Soft. Subtle. The melody was tragic but didn't overwhelm the listener in its emotion, creating a rich tapestry of notes seamlessly woven into the orchestral accompaniment. That was nice. I needed something to relax me right now. This situation was a tough one to call. I could just go ahead and take a seat opposite him, showing a bit of balls, which could lead to them being removed if he perceived my hubramaz, dwarven word for chutzpah, as a threat or challenge. Or I could just continue to stand there like a total mook, providing some dinner entertainment for a while until boredom settled in, and then face a quick end on an empty stomach. Being in his presence meant waiting on a word, so I'd have to play tonight by his rules. It was no different from the rules of royalty. Speak only when spoken to, and move only when told. As a waiter brought in a second plate, I lowered my defenses ever so slightly to savor the sharp, tangy scent of tomatoes mingled with earthy aromas of oregano, basil, and the ambrosia of the culinary gods. Garlic. A sweet tinge of cinnamon was also present, and I wasn't used to that in a red sauce. A secret ingredient, perhaps? Now the waiter was grating fresh Parmesan cheese over the dish. A simple dish for a simple taste. Sometimes it is the simple things you crave, even when you have everything, as this man did. that made life worth living. Contemplating the man at the table more closely, I realized that he didn't have everything, so much as he rented it for the time being. This man of girth would fall one day as would a star from the night sky, making people stop and stare in wonder, only to burn out and vanish with no fanfare. Empires like his believed themselves to last a millennium, only to fade into history tomorrow. Yeah, not that far stretch from my old stomping grounds, this place called Chicago.
Your blade's getting cold. Pull up a chair.
My waxing philosophic immediately screeched to a halt on the sound of his voice, his chewing as he spoke giving it a casual, muffled sound. The invitation could only mean that for the time being anyway, I was a guest. He didn't hear it, but I let out a soft sigh of relief. Okay then, all bets were off. I could loosen up a bit. Well, to a point. I was a guest as long as his temperament and attitude approved, but that could change in a heartbeat. The waiter pulled back the chair and, on measuring me up, added a couple of throw cushions from a nearby couch. I hopped up and adjusted myself to be on a decent level with the table. The pressed white linen over the waiter's forearm was draped across my lap before he moved me closer to my dinner. With that same artificial smile the rest of the hotel staff wore, he took my hat out of my hands, gave me a nod, and then excused himself from the room. It was going to be a lovely night of good food, good music, and good conversation. Just me, the guards, and my host, Alphonse Capone. This is real generous of you, Mr. Capone. My original dinner plans were for something a bit less complex. He gave a chortle and glanced at me while holding a fork of pasta halfway between his mouth and the plate.
Spaghetti? Complex? Let me tell you, where I come from, this is just comfort food, you know? Something I throw together when I want to fill up quick. Now, if you want complex, you ought to have my chef whip up a tortellini dish for you sometimes.
Alphonse shoved his mouth full of spaghetti, finishing his thought as he chewed.
I'm into the prosciutto and chicken he's got down. Cover with Alfredo sauce, knock your socks off.
If this was the meal of a condemned man, I was not going to let it go cold. I dug into the small mountain of pasta before me, twirling my fork into the steaming noodles. Up close, I caught some of the sauce's subtleties, a signature of his chef that distinguished him as a master. Italian food, at least for me, was always a fare that you either got right on the first try or not at all. You might go too heavy on the salt, get chintzy with the parsley, or use the wrong kind of basil and throw off the balance. Now me, I'm a purple basil dwarf myself. It's got a sweet aftertaste and plays well with other herbs, in particular the oregano and garlic. This spaghetti, a simple comfort food of the Italian cuisine, was nothing less than a masterpiece. Bueno pasto. Your chef knows his sauce, Mr. Capone. I nodded in approval.
He'd better. It's me.
The guy who ran Chicago cooked too? Damn, I was impressed. On the second bite, I chewed a bit slower. This was the best spaghetti I'd ever had. Period. You missed your calling, Mr. Capone. You would have made a chef worthy of a royal entourage.
Nah.
He dismissed with a wave of his hand.
My chef handles the tough stuff. I just have those times like tonight when I want something simple and I don't mind cluttering up the kitchen. Just because I got off the boat and out here in Chicago don't mean I forgot where I come from. Take my word for it. Nothing's more important than remember where you come from.
Capone held the dark red-purple wine underneath his nose for a moment, enjoying its aroma while eyeballing me.
You're shorter than I thought. Must be tough being a little guy like yourself in a town this big, huh?
I wasn't returning the stare, but his stare wasn't what made me uncomfortable. It was the direction he was already taking with our dinner chit-chat. I manage.
I bet you do, you little sprite, yeah.
My fork paused for a second. That dig didn't ruin my appetite or taste of the spaghetti, but I didn't want to see this pleasant scene go bad. I'm sure he caught my hesitation, so now he knew what button to push if he wanted to get in a last word, or just see what a pissed-off dwarf looked like.
Yeah, I bet you do, and you know what? I respect that. I do. You're facing an uphill battle, short stuff, and you're not letting anything slow you down.
I'm not much for the wine. It's an elf's drink. As I took a sip to wash down the spaghetti, though, I couldn't deny it. The wine suited the sauce. One exceptional table Capone set. Come on, Al. Don't spoil this dinner with the height jokes. Capone nodded with a smile, waving a beefy finger.
You're very good, you. You got balls and you got heart, and that is worthy of my respect.
I inclined my head modestly. You're making a great wall out of pixie bricks, Mr. Capone. He shook his head after the wine glass left his lips. The same finger he just waved at me pointed up to let me know something important was about to be said.
Nah. I just said you earned my respect. Please, honor me by calling me Al.
Oh boy, did I really want to cross this line? Hastily finishing my mouthful of pasta, I lifted my glass in a toast. Only if you return the favor and call me Billy, I replied with a grin.
Here's to you, Billy.
It amazed me that I could enjoy this meal under the circumstances. The wine was good, as I said, but after that last exchange, I really wanted something stronger. I was not only having dinner with Alphonse Capone, but now I was on a first-name basis with him. I think a bullet to the head would have been easier to deal with than this. No, Al, you honor me. By the fates, that just felt wrong in so many ways. You're treating me to a terrific dinner you yourself cooked, with good wine, and I would be the last one to flout this honor by not being an appreciative guest.
Flout?
Capone chuckled.
Flout? What? Something in that sauce giving you gas?
No, Al, I mean throw it back in your face. As if I couldn't make this dinner more awkward, I had to pull out a word from the library stacks and teach it to a gangland boss. Far be it from me, a working-class dwarf, to break bread at a king's table and then take a battle-axe to the hand that's feeding me. He nodded, I thought, in response to my comment, but then he said it again.
Flout.
He kept nodding.
Flout. I like that. That's classy. Flout.
Seriously, Al, I continued, I'm just a working stiff. I do what I do because no one else is going to do it, or wants to do it. Yeah, I was just telling my secretary that today. He sat back in the chair with a long, contented sigh. At first, I thought it was in response to the wine or the meal, but then I caught the leer on his face.
Oh, now that Miranda Tanner is one nice piece, Billy. I'm surprised you didn't get into pictures or something like that.
No, he didn't just do that. Humans, in particular the really menacing ones, love to play this game. I feel the same way about it here as I did back in Acryonis. It's a coward's ploy. Face me in the field like an equal. That's a code we dwarves live by. You touch my family, or those close to me, and I got only 3 words for you. Better be sure. Better be sure I don't get up. Better be sure I don't get over a severe case of death. Better be sure I can't find you. She's a good girl, Al. My voice was calm, but my intent was as crystal clear as the jewel of Shri-Mela. I love her like family. That was going to be his only warning.
Yeah?
Capone nodded, my tone clearly registering with him as he paused for a moment.
And being a little big man like you, I can't help but respect how you're coming up in the world. Front page in 3 newspapers. My hat's off to you, Brownie.
With the mention of the newspapers, I knew we were finally getting round to what he wanted to know. My connection. To deal with the brownie insult, I just shoveled more pasta into my mouth to shut myself up. I was just silently hoping dessert was going to be something other than cannoli. Too much cheese gives me the kind of gas that would make a rock dragon turn around and shout,
"All right, that wasn't me."
I had known all along that this case would eventually bring me here. After all, I was getting involved with the business. However, I had been hoping for that involvement to be more on my terms, preferably with someone close to Capone. But sitting down with Capone himself, over a dinner he cooked? Now that was something I didn't count on. As nice as our dinner had started, though, he had begun playing games almost immediately. The second insult was no slip. Then a mention of Miranda, extremely intentional. If his hospitality had caught me completely off guard, the games sobered me up pretty quickly. You set a terrific table, Al. I broke off a piece of bread, dipping it in the sauce remaining outside my pasta. I can't help, though, but worry that I'm taking up your valuable time. Al's smile softened as he helped himself to a hunk of bread. His plate still had a bit of the sauce left on it, but not for long as he ran the bread across its surface.
What makes you say that, Brownie?
Yep, he did it again. Time to swallow hard and keep going. Well, just that you're a man of extremes. You either enjoy the lush life or you're keeping to yourself. Tonight you're dining here in this ritzy hotel, big room, sitting at a table for 8, and your guards are on the clock. Dinner at what I'm guessing is your office kind of tells me you didn't feel like being social tonight. Capone gave a laugh and nodded.
Very good, you. Guess being a private eye, it's hard to turn that off, huh?
I just watch and learn, Al, I replied with a shrug. He was right, but I wasn't going to let him in on that. I watch and learn.
And how about teach, Billy?
His plate now clean, he shot a glance to the waiter hovering in the doorway before picking up his wine glass. I watched as the employee disappeared the moment Al took a sip, his glass nearing empty.
You have a teach?
I finished my own glass. I could see a trace of a grin on his face. Well, I replied, I don't so much teach as I inform. Al nodded slowly, turning his attention to the window opposite. A car honked, its engine revved, and then faded into the distance. He looked back at me.
Think you could inform me then?
Capone's waiter reappeared with an open bottle of wine and a second. As he refilled the glass, the other waiter appeared with a pipe removed from me earlier, already packed with my weed, and a good-sized cigar, already cut and waiting to be lit.
You see,
Capone continued,
I'm looking for some information, and I can't think of no one better to inform me than a private dick from the front page.
I could have come back with that private investigator line I used with Miss Lessinger and Miss Rothschild, except that here it would be my ticket on the Wise Ass Express to the afterlife. All you have to do is ask, Al. I smiled as I mopped up my plate with a fresh baguette, its thin crust melting in my mouth. The wine steward offered a refill, but I shook my head and took my pipe. You've been a gracious host and a stand-up guy for inviting me to dinner. I wasn't lying there. Insults aside, Capone was being gracious. After all, I was still breathing. Pretty damn gracious, if you ask me. Capone laughed, his laughs sounding closer to pig's grunts as he placed the stogie in his mouth.
You know something, Shorty? I'm liking you the longer we sit here.
He drew from the cut end as the waiter held a small lighter to the cigar, causing the lighter's flame to flare with each of his deep drags.
Now, don't get me wrong.
He continued, still lighting the cigar. I guess he felt like he had to get his thoughts out, regardless of how much the cigar hindered his speech.
I understand you got obligations.
One more long drag, and the cigar was lit, his speech clearing up.
An obligation to keep things private and all. So do I. I got obligations. Obligations to the people who work for me, obligations to my family, and obligations to my friends.
Obligations to friends, Al? I placed the pipe stem in my mouth, and on cue, the wine steward ignited the lighter, catching the contents of my bowl. Once the weed glowed softly, the servant gave me a courteous nod and cleared my side of the table. Some friends asking obligations of you? With the second already heading for the kitchen with Al's dishes, the butler took my plate and empty glass, gave a nod to us, and we were alone once again. Just us and Capone's hired muscle. Their attentions divided between the world outside the hotel, the corridors outside our suite, and me. I removed the pipe from my mouth, sending a light puff above us. Didn't want to be rude to the host. What kind of obligations are we talking about?
Favors fulfilled, Billy. Promises kept. And if I make a promise, my honor, my children's honor, and the honor of my family is challenged. I'm not one to back off from a challenge, no matter where it comes from.
Capone reached up for a folded newspaper, letting it fall open to the front page. This headline was about as clever as the one I'd read this morning. Half and half. The headline blared in huge letters above the picture of me leaving Roletto's crime scene. This public eye, though, got lucky. Along with revealing me being escorted from the alleyway, the photo included the bottom half of Roletto stuffed in the trash can behind me.
And these people I got obligations to?
Al went on.
Well, Billy, they want to know who's issuing the challenge.
Big Al had a point. All I could do was remove my eyes from the newspapers and lock on his. I can understand that. He kept this stare with me for a moment, and then turned back to the picture, puffing the stogie in his mouth.
I figure you would, you smart guy.
After appearing to memorize every inch of that front page, he took another drag from the cigar, shaking his head disapprovingly. I gave my pipe a long drag too, sending a few smoke rings to one side. I find smoke rings make great tension breakers. So Al, these obligations to these friends of yours, your crew, how do they involve me?
Now, the private dick, I think you can figure that out.
Oh, it's a test, I said with just a touch of facetiousness. Not that I was expecting Capone to pick up on it. He didn't, thank the fates. Well, now let's see. The Defender's photographers couldn't get too close to the crime scene in question, but they did manage to get a shot of a rather handsome dwarf. Now, if this handsome dwarf is coming from a crime scene that public eyes couldn't get up close to, he must have been invited by Chicago's finest to give them some pointers on the crime scene. Replacing the pipe in my mouth, I concluded, and when you got a Mick like a Maldy running the fuzz, Chicago needs all the help it can get. Al gave a few healthy guffaws, the cigar still lodged in between his teeth.
So you go back a ways with O'Malley, eh?
We've danced a few times. He's got 2 left feet. Capone gave a few more chuckles, paused, puffed, and then asked,
But he still invited you to have a look at what happened to my boy Benny.
Yeah, apparently I was the last one to be seen with him.
And then Benny winds up dead in an alley?
He folded up the paper and set it on the table, rubbing his forehead with his palm while the cigar continued to smolder between 2 fingers.
This upsets me. This upsets me like you wouldn't believe, Billy.
Yeah, it upsets me too. I took another slow drag as I studied Al, who remained engrossed in the newspaper. Benny was a good guy, a real pal. I'm sure you feel a loss. He finally looked over.
I just learned the guy's name a couple days ago.
He remarked, his tone a bit cold and callous.
Still, he was a loyal soldier and all. But since you knew Benny so well, how about you tell me what you two talked about?
Finally, we were getting down to business. I was going to fess up that I'd been poking my pudgy nose into Al's affairs. Now that we were facing the real reason why I was there, I knew I needed to tread lightly, unless I wanted to make a bad situation worse. Although he was public enemy number 1, Capone never forgot the big 3: duty, honor, family. If you asked him what got him up to where he was, he would have given the big 3 all the credit. Well, most of it anyway. I'm sure the bullets and the brutality were a big help too. If you betrayed any of Al's holy trinity, you'd better have a portal of oblivion to get sucked into, because there wouldn't be any place you could hide from him in this world. Al, I began, adopting the casual approach. Now I was friendly, chummy, and relaxing with an old friend. An old friend who wouldn't hesitate to use me for his private boat's anchor. We've been sitting here, breaking bread and sharing wine as friends. So how about we talk like friends? Capiche? Capone didn't budge. You know what I do for a living. People pay me to find answers to questions, all kinds of questions. Why? Because I ask the questions no one else will ask, to people no one wants to be seen or associated with. I'm on a case right now, and the question my client asked led me to Benny Roletto. I asked the question. We talked a bit, and we didn't talk about anything in your business save for one thing. One of your generals, Anthony Pretty Boy DeMaio. I noticed Capone flinch on hearing DeMaio's name. Interesting reaction to his former right-hand man. He puffed on his cigar, still avoiding any eye contact. Maybe he was thinking about DeMaio. Looking back on their years together, whatever trip my new friend Al was taking down memory lane, it was not a pleasant one. His eyes darkened slightly. Now it was my turn to watch him in silence, trying to figure out if I was going to leave on my own accord or be carried out by 4 of Capone's boys. It's one thing to hit one of your own, but you brought that whole building down with not 1, not 2, but 3 bombs? Capone nodded.
I was trying to prove a point.
Prove a point, Al? I leaned forward, fishing for a certain response. Or trying to bury something you couldn't control. Maybe he knew more about DeMaio's plan than he was letting on. Did Capone think that DeMaio had the sword, and figured he would bury both traitor and trinket, making sure neither would move against him? Did Capone know something about the singing sword that he wasn't admitting? He raised a dark eyebrow, a smile accented by the cigar between his lips, the prelude to a soft laugh.
I'm impressed.
He finally said, removing the stogie and tapping it free of ashes.
A little private eye Tom Thumb, ain't you?
The ogre at the door was snickering. Now we're back to the name-calling? Bad direction, Al. Don't do this.
You got balls. Serious balls for a small fry, Billy.
Yeah, well, when you're only coming up to the waistline, you got two options to do with what the other guy's shoving in your face. Me, I choose to punch him. The Catholic Church is always in need of good sopranos. Oh, he found that one funny.
Good one, Billy, good one. But you know, I am not a violent man. I'm not. I just have a temper.
He shrugged, gesturing with his hands, his smoke sending wisps around his head.
My boys know it. Chicago knows it.
His voice trailed off as he leaned forward, the cigar now pointing upward like a defiant one-finger salute. He wasn't smiling anymore.
But I'm thinking maybe you don't know this. Shorty, you just need to ask if you really want to screw with me.
This intimidation game was getting dull. Okay, I'll ask. Do you really want to screw with me? Capone didn't laugh. I didn't expect him to. You asked me what I talked about with Benny. I told you. And as I told you before, Al, I'm not stupid enough to lie to you. I'm telling you the truth about Benny and my morning. Now you're fishing for, what, details? Then I went on a research trip to the Ryerson. What more do you want?
What do I want? What do I want?
Capone was on his feet now, his face a deep mottled red. I knew what he wanted. It had nothing to do with details. I just wanted to be sure.
You know what I want. I want to hear it. I want to hear what you found out about that thing.
I kept my eyes locked on him, sending a set of smoke rings his way.
You know something, Baddins?
Okay, that's his wind-up. I'm thinking his fastball is next.
For Pixie, you're a handful.
Fine. Time to send this pitch deep into center field. Yeah, but even being a dwarf, I still stand toe-to-toe with you, Scarface. I heard the ogre's hammers pull back. They must have pulled out their heaters when Capone exploded, thinking I was on borrowed time. Maybe I was close to taking the dirt nap, but I really didn't care now what line I'd just crossed. I knew he killed people for calling him that, but he wouldn't stop pushing. Something else Al didn't know about me? I can handle being called an elf before being called a pixie. You lose that temper of yours, kill me now, and I take what I know with me. Now maybe you're thinking, so what? Well, how about I tell you exactly what? He was about to pop, but I just wasn't all that impressed. I've seen orcs up close and personal, feeling their breath on my face and smelling their sweat in the heat of battle. You think this fat human is going to intimidate me? Let's say you find whatever you're looking for. I can tell you this, you're not going to know what the hell it does, or how it works. I'll make a wizard's wager that no one in this world is going to know what the hell it does, or how it works. So that leaves me. I gave a nod to the steward and held out my pipe. After his eyes darted nervously from me to Capone, he quickly turned to fetch me an ashtray. Poor guy was sweating harder than a fully armored foot soldier in summer. I'm not from these parts, Al. Like you couldn't have guessed that. So when you finally find what we're both talking about, which is... I wanted Capone to say it. I didn't need to ask myself if we were talking about the same thing. Coincidence was a fair-weather wench in my life.
The singing sword,
He finally said, his voice just audible over the outside traffic. A piercing tink, 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 tink filled the room as I rapped my pipe against the thick marble tray. I gave my bowl a quick check before giving Al the final score in this pennant playoff. Then you're going to need an expert from the outside. And I'm here to tell you, Al, that they don't come more outside than me. The cigar smoldered between his pudgy lips, but I could tell from the occasional glow of the embers that he was still breathing. Calling Capone the name he hated was a stupid thing to do, but what I was offering him was far beyond the borderlands of his imagination. It was also my bargaining chip with the big man. What I knew about the sword of Acryonis would wrap Capone around my finger until I became useless. Then he would bring up the Scarface comment and take me for diving lessons off the Reliance building. I knew that this was a serious bluff, but I wasn't showing my cards. Capone wasn't the only one who knew the gargoyle's stare. He finally moved away from the end of the table and leaned in close to me. If it had just been the two of us, I would have slapped that stogie out of his mouth. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to bore through me with his steely gaze.
And why do you think you can stand up to me, Baddins?
I conjured up the best shit-eating grin I could muster. Because I know what the word flout means. Okay, it was his move. I didn't have to glance at Al's muscle to know they were just wanting the nod. I hadn't heard their boom daggers slipping back into their holsters. A single gesture stood between me leaving here on my own accord and that long car ride out to the country where 3 leave and 2 come back. He grunted. Okay, not what I expected, but it was better than having him give the command to his boys. Again, he grunted. And these grunts eventually turned into a good, healthy laugh.
You're funny. Yeah, you're a funny guy, Billy.
Capone nodded approvingly, still laughing at me as if I was a court jester who finally got in the big score. Even over his guffaws, I could hear the guns behind me slipping back into holsters.
And I like funny guys, Baddins. I do. Yeah, there's too much tragedy on the streets.
Listen, Al, I volunteered. I don't know if you were on top of this, but you may not be the only boss looking for the singing sword. His laughter died down as he put out his cigar in the massive ashtray on his end of the table.
Really? And what gives you that impression?
A couple of trolls dropped Bug's name to me a couple of nights ago. Consider that a free bit of investigation from me. Capone nodded. He didn't seem surprised at all, but he did appear disappointed.
So I take it you're going to work for me if I get the singing sword first?
If you don't, I'll get it for you. You got an idea what it can do, and I know exactly what it can do. I'd rather see it in your hands before Moran's. No offense, but you're the lesser of 2 evils. My second bluff. I just hope he took it as well as the first. He nodded. Al, I went on, Chicago is yours, and I respect that. I'm going to make sure the singing sword goes to the right people. And the right people are in this room. Yeah, the right people were in this room, all right. It was me. He was quiet, thinking over my offer. For the second time tonight, the chances of me seeing the sunrise tomorrow rested with his decision. Guns out or not, the ogres were still on the clock and waited on that decision. Right along with me.
Then, I'll bid you good evening, Mr. Baddins. I hope you enjoyed dinner.
Mr. Capone, the pleasure was all mine. I slipped my pipe back into my inside pocket and fixed my stare with Capone's. Yeah, it was my pleasure that I was walking out and not being carried out. If you come across the singing sword, Mr. Capone, you go on and give me a call, and my services are yours.
Count on it.
I fought the instinct to run, keeping my strides relaxed, but long. One of his orcs took me back to the elevator, handing over my guns and tobacco pouch before shutting the cage on me and the freckled kid. As our descent began, I wasn't planning to let this thug enjoy watching me breathe a sigh of relief. He was already shouldering the disappointment of seeing my face leaving the same way it went in. And this lovable mug of mine didn't have a split lip, black eye, or switchblade scars across the cheek. Right before he slipped out of view, I gave this mook a wink. Be seeing you, I thought with a grin. I probably would, seeing as I was now a valuable commodity to his boss. I maintained my calm, casual gait to the outside, where I tipped the grinning doorman a $5, and hailed the cab that would get me home. I whispered a quick prayer to Dungagor, one of the dwarven guardians of your nace, that if he were going to raise his battle axe for anyone, to let it be for my girl, Miranda. I was confident that I'd charmed Capone and figured he wouldn't play that card. At least, right now. I had to keep him and his goons at arm's length and string him along while I figured out what the hell to do with the singing sword once I got it. Yeah, once I got it. There was no room for ifs and mights here. Either I got it, or the world I now called home was going to be in for one rough, bumpy ride.